Biggles was whistling softly as he walked into the breakfast room of his flat in Mount Street, but broke off as he reached for a bulky package with Canadian stamps lying beside his plate. Across the top was printed in block letters, "Confidential. If away, please forward." "What's Wilkes doing in Canada, I wonder?" murmured Algy from the other side of the table. Biggles glanced up. "Been doing a bit of Sherlock Holmes stuff with my correspondence, eh?" "Well, as I happen to know Wilkes' fist, and am able to recognise a Canadian stamp when I see one, I put two and two together," replied Algy casually. "Who's Wilkes?" Ginger asked Algy. He had finished his breakfast and was sitting by the fire. "Wilkes, or rather Captain Wilkinson, was a flight commander in 187 Squadron in France," answered Algy. "He was an officer in the Bolivian Air Force when we last saw him. I wonder what sent him up north." Biggles read the letter to the end before laying it on the table beside him. "Poor old Wilkes is in a jam," he said quietly. "What's the trouble?" asked Algy. Biggles picked up the letter again. "Listen to this. The letter's headed Arctic Airways, Fort Beaver, Canada. My dear Biggles, as you probably remember, letter writing is not in my line, so you no doubt guessed before you opened this that things must be pretty sticky. Believe me, they're all that, and more. Before I start my story, I may as well say that the odds seem to be against my being alive by the time you get this. If I just disappear, or get wiped out in what looks like a genuine crash, find a fellow named McBain, Brindle Jake he is called around these parts, and hand him a bunch of slugs from me, as a last service from an old pal." "By gosh, things must be pretty grim for old Wilkes to write in that strain," broke in Algy. "Grim is the right word for it," said Biggles shortly. "But don't interrupt, just listen to this. You remember that I was in Bolivia a few years ago. Well, there was a change of government, and as I didn't like the new one, or maybe the new one didn't like me, I packed my valise, headed north, and ultimately drifted into Canada. One day I struck lucky and got a charter job flying a mining engineer up to some new goldfields for an outfit called the Moose Creek Goldfields Corporation. You may have heard of the last place on Earth. Well, I can tell you where it is. Moose Creek. It's well inside the Arctic Circle, though why they call it Moose Creek I don't know, for no moose in its right mind would go within 100 miles of the perishing place. But that's by the way. Having got the lowdown about these goldfields, I had one of my rare inspirations. "Oh, that's old Wilkes for you," said Algy. "Moose Creek is 800 miles north of the nearest railhead, and the journey, made by canoe in summer and dog sled during the freeze-up, takes about 6 weeks, heavy going. It struck me that since there was certain to be a fair amount of traffic to and from the goldfields, an airline might be worked up into a paying proposition. In an aircraft, the journey could be done in a day instead of 6 weeks. To cut a long story short, I put all my savings into the venture, opening up my own landing field at Fort Beaver, which is the railhead. I called it Arctic Airways. I got into the money, and with my profits bought a second machine. Then, listen to this, out of the blue, another fellow jumped my claim. The same Brindle Jake that I've already mentioned. It seemed a bit thick after all I'd been through, but I figured that there ought to be enough money in the game for the two of us. However, Brindle had his own ideas about that. He decided that 2 in the game was one too many, and he wasn't going to be the one to go. From that moment I learned that the gloves were off. There is only one possible landing ground within 50 miles of Fort Beaver, and that's mine. I bought the land off a fellow named Angus Sterling, who had decided that he preferred prospecting for gold to farming. I paid him cash, whereupon he headed north with his gear, and hasn't been seen since. I cleared the ground, put up a shed, and the land became Fort Beaver Landing Field. There was never any question about the title of the land until, one day, 2 Winkel 12 transport planes landed, and out stepped Brindle Jake and his 2 pilots, Joe Sarton, a tall chap, good-looking in a rugged sort of way, and Tex Ferroni, a slim, dark little fellow. McBain himself is a big, broad-shouldered bloke with odd patches of grey in his hair and beard. That's how he gets his nickname, I'm told. A half-breed French-Canadian named Jean Chicot trails after him like a dog, and I reckon he's McBain's bodyguard. Pretty motley crew, put in Algy. Biggles read on. You can guess my surprise when McBain calmly told me to clear off the land. I can't go into details now, but for the first time I learned that there was some doubt as to the title of the land I'd bought off Sterling. For some extraordinary reason, there seems to be no record of his having paid the government for it. Angus Sterling told me that he got the land under a settler's grant, but the fact remains he didn't give the transfer to me. However, if I don't own the land, neither does Brindle, although he tries to bluff me he does. McBain built some sheds and started operating to Moose Creek right away. I flew up and saw the traffic manager of the Goldfields Company, a decent little fellow named Canwell, and lodged a complaint, but it didn't get me very far. Canwell's only concerned with getting his stuff to the railhead, and he doesn't care two hoots who takes it, as long as it goes. He as good as told me that in this country it's up to a fellow to work out his own salvation, so that was that. I got my first idea of Brindle's methods when, a day or two later, one of my machines shed its wing just after takeoff. Yet I'd stake my life that that machine was airworthy. Brindle or one of his men tampered with it, I'm certain, but of course I can't prove anything. The pilot was killed. I bought another machine and hired another pilot. 2 days later, the new machine went up in flames during the night, and my new pilot packed up and left. I've no money to buy another machine, and the one I have left is a Rockheed freighter, which I fly myself. I sleep in it with a gun in my hand, but I can't stand the strain much longer. I've nearly been killed 2 or 3 times by accident. Brindle wants the aerodrome, but I've told him he'll only get it over my dead body, and that isn't bluff. The fact is, old lad, it goes against the grain to be run out of the territory by a low-down grafter. I'm fighting a lone hand. I'm in this up to the neck, and I'm going to see it through to the last turn of the prop. It isn't just money that matters now. I won't be jumped out by a crooked skunk. So if you want a spot of real flying with the lid off, step right across and give me a hand. We did a job or two together in the old days. Let's do one more. All the best to Algy. Remember that first hun he shot down? The laugh was certainly on you that time. Yours ever, Wilkes. Biggles' face was set in hard lines as he tossed the letter on the table. How long ago was it posted? Asked Algy. 9 days. Anything could have happened in that time. What are you going to do? Put in Ginger. That remains to be seen, replied Biggles curtly. For the moment, we're going to Fort Beaver as fast as we can get there. Algy, ring up and find out when the next boat sails. Ginger, pass me that directory. I'll send a few cables. We shall want a machine waiting for us when we land, with the props ticking over. Get your bags packed, everybody, and put in plenty of wool and kit. I've never been to Canada, but I seem to have heard that the winters there are inclined to be chilly. Then, let's go and see if we can warm things up, murmured Algy. Exactly 16 days after Wilkes's SOS had been received in London, a blue-wing Jupiter airliner circled low over the cluster of log huts which comprised Fort Beaver. Biggles sat at the controls, Algy beside him, with Ginger braced in the narrow corridor that connected the pilot's control cabin with what normally would have been the main passenger saloon. Behind, amongst the luggage in the rear compartment, sat Flight Sergeant Smith, Biggles' old fitter and sharer of many adventures. They all wore heavy flying kit with the fur outside, for although it was not yet winter, it was already cold, and the annual freeze-up could be expected in the near future. Biggles regarded the landing ground dispassionately as he throttled back and prepared to glide in. "I never saw a more desolate-looking spot in all my life," commented Algy. "What do you expect to find? Concrete runways?" inquired Biggles sarcastically. "Anyway, is that old Wilkes I can see, mending his hut?" Algy peered through the side window. "Yeah, that fellow's too tall for Wilkes," he declared. "And he seems to be tearing the place down, not mending it." Biggles glanced across quickly. "The dickens he does. That doesn't look too good." Nothing more was said, and a minute later the wheels of the big machine were trundling over the rough surface of the landing ground, scored in 100 places with tyre tracks. Moving slowly and majestically, the Jupiter roared up to where a little group of men stood staring at them from in front of a rough but stoutly built hangar, roofed with corrugated iron. "Funny, I don't see Wilkes," murmured Algy. "Maybe he's in the air." "Maybe," replied Biggles. "This is his shed, for there's his company's name board leaning against the wall. Looks as if it's just been taken down. I don't like the look of things, so we'd better leave the engines running in case we want to go up again in a hurry. Tell Smith to come here and take over and keep an eye on us. Let's get out." As the 3 airmen stepped down from the saloon door, leaving Smith in the control cabin with the engines idling, 4 men walked to meet them. A 5th, obviously an Indian, remained standing near the hangar. One of the four, a little ahead of the others and clearly the leader, was a tall, burly man whose bristling, square-cut beard was curiously streaked with grey. He wore a fur cap with flaps hanging loosely over his ears, a check-patterned lumber shirt, and dark corduroy trousers tucked into half-Wellington boots. A broad belt with cartridge pouches thrust through loops was buckled tightly round his waist. The man who walked close behind him was an entirely different type, although he was dressed in much the same fashion. Slight in build, his delicate features might have passed for those of a woman, but for a wisp of black moustache that decorated his upper lip. The fur jacket he wore was thrown open, revealing a beautifully worked Indian belt, through which was thrust a large Bowie knife. 2 or 3 paces behind strolled 2 other men, their hands thrust carelessly into their trouser pockets. One was a fresh-complexioned man of perhaps 35 years of age, with a fair moustache. His companion was younger, and as swarthy as the other was fair. Remembering the descriptions in Wilkes's letter, Biggles could have named them all. The big man was obviously Brindle McBain. The man who walked close behind him like a dog was Jean Chicot. The other 2 were the pilots, Joe Sarton, the fair man, and Tex Ferroni, the slim, dark little fellow. Wilkes's descriptions had been brief but singularly apt, thought Biggles, as he walked slowly to meet them, at the same time drawing off his gauntlets. An atmosphere of desertion, almost of desolation, hung over the place. McBain was the first to speak. $10, stranger. Biggles raised his eyebrows in surprise. What for? Landing fee. Oh, are you the authorized collector for Arctic Airways? McBain's eyes rested broodingly on Biggles' slight frame. No, I'm collecting for myself. I see, and who might you be? McBain's the name. Ah, mine's Bigglesworth. But aren't you making a mistake, Mr. McBain? This field belongs to Arctic Airways. Yeah? Well, you're making the mistake. Belongs to me, grated McBain. Whatever gave you that idea? Inquired Biggles, and nodding curtly he moved towards what was obviously Arctic Airways' reception office. For a moment it looked as though McBain would intercept him, but he took a pace forward, clenching and unclenching his hands. But then his companion said something to him that the others could not catch, and he stopped, scowling. Algy and Ginger followed Biggles into the office. There was nobody there, although by this time they did not expect to find anyone. Everything was in confusion. Files and papers were strewn everywhere. Algy's face was grim as he looked around. I don't like the look of this, he said quietly. I'm afraid we've come too late. Before Biggles could answer, there was a whip-like crack. Several splinters flew across the room, one striking Biggles on the cheek and drawing blood. That was a shot, snapped Algy, then darted after Biggles, who had already flung open the door and was striding white-faced towards McBain and his companions. The effeminate-looking man, Jean Chicot, was sitting on a chock, smiling, a small automatic in his hands. Biggles went straight up to him. Did you fire that shot? I cleaned my gun. So he go off. These accidents come sometimes, yes? Biggles did not answer. His fist flew out in a vicious uppercut. Every scrap of the pent-up anger that was in him went behind that blow. Chicot went straight over backwards and crashed across the concrete apron. He twisted for a moment and then lay still. Biggles' face was white, and his lips were set in a straight line as he looked down at him. Keep your hands away from your belt, McBain, snapped Algy. Seeing what was coming, he had whipped out his automatic the instant Biggles struck the blow. Biggles looked round. Plug him if he moves, Algy, he said grimly. If this gang of crooks wants it hot, by thunder they can have it. Say, what's going on? Biggles spun round and saw that a newcomer had arrived on the scene. It was a constable of the Northwest Mounted Police. What's going on? Said the constable again. Nothing to speak of, replied Biggles. My friends and I just arrived by air. For some reason best known to himself, McBain tried to scare us off by getting his playmate to pull a gun on us. So I had to hit him. The constable regarded Biggles thoughtfully.
What are you doing in this, out-of-the-way place, anyway?
I'm putting money into Arctic Airways, which belongs to a friend of mine, Wilkinson. I want to know where he is, and I reckon McBain knows. The constable turned to McBain.
Where's Wilkinson? Search me, Delaney.
Well, when did you last see him?
4 days back. He was taken off, headed north for Moose Creek, I guess.
And he hasn't come back?
Well, I ain't looked for him.
You had a good look at the inside of his office, at any rate, put in Biggles coldly. McBain looked at Biggles evilly, then turned to the constable.
Well, what are you going to do about it? He inquired. I've got something else to do besides standing here gassing.
So have I, returned the constable. You ought to have reported Wilkinson missing, McBain. I shall have to ask anyone going north to look out for him. Don't worry, constable, I'll do that, said Biggles quickly. I'm going to look for him right now. Biggles turned towards the Jupiter. Come on, you fellows, he went on quietly to the others, taking no further notice of Delaney or McBain. Wilkes must be down somewhere between here and Moose Creek. We've got nearly 4 hours of daylight left, so the sooner we start looking for him, the better. Within 5 minutes, the Jupiter was in the air again, headed northwards, with Algy watching the ground on the starboard side and Ginger on the other. For a long time they flew over almost continuous forests of fir, with great outcrops of grey rock thrusting upwards like spurs. Then the country started to rise, and the Jupiter was soon skimming over the treetops. Biggles eased the stick back and climbed slowly to a safer height. At the end of an hour, the forest had become broken into isolated groups of wind-twisted trees, and shortly afterwards even these failed to appear, giving way to a dismal panorama of gaunt rock.
If Wilkes had to go down and land on that stuff, I should say he hadn't a hope. I shouldn't care to have to put a machine down on that... Hello? What's that, dead ahead? It looks like something on the ground. Is it? By heaven, it is. It's a machine. There's somebody beside it. Look, he's waving. Must be Wilkes, declared Biggles. Nobody else would be flying up here. Give him a wave. With Algy hanging out of the window with an arm outstretched, the Jupiter dropped lower, until at last it was circling in a steep bank, not more than 50 feet above the other machine. They could see the man on the ground, hobbling away from the stationary machine, from time to time stopping to pick up a boulder and throw it aside. He's clearing a runway for us, declared Algy. So I see, answered Biggles with a worried frown. I don't relish the thought of getting down on it all the same. Biggles turned the machine slowly until it was in line with the runway. Then he allowed it to sink slowly towards it. Flattening out a few inches above the ground, he held the stick firmly, holding the machine off as long as he dared. The Jupiter vibrated from nose to tail skid as her wheels rumbled over the uneven ground, but they stood up to the strain, and the machine finally came to rest about 200 yards from the lone figure, which at once began hurrying towards them. There was no longer any doubt about who it was.
"Biggles! By all that's wonderful!"
cried Wilkes enthusiastically. Well might you say, by all that's wonderful, grinned Biggles, as he shook hands with his old war comrade.
"Oh, the dickens did you know where I was?"
demanded Wilkes. Just a minute, old boy. Let's take one thing at a time, suggested Biggles. I'll tell my story first. We've been to Fort Beaver. Landed there about lunchtime today. We found McBain, and I might tell you he and I had a few sharp words. Constable Delaney blew in while the argument was in progress, and McBain admitted that you'd flown off and hadn't come back. So we came along to pick up the pieces. What happened to you? Wilkes's smile faded as he told his story. He spoke bitterly.
"Somebody was kind enough to put a handful of loose cotton waste in my second tank, and it choked the petrol leads. Engines packed up, and I had to come down, but I had enough juice in my gravity tank to enable me to reach this place. I was lucky to make it."
The cotton waste was McBain's work? Asked Biggles.
"Well, of course."
While they'd been speaking, they had been moving slowly towards Wilkes's machine. "Did you knock your leg when you came down?" asked Biggles, noting that Wilkes was limping.
"Oh, I hit my knee a crack against the dashboard when we tipped up,"
returned Wilkes briefly. "Machine damaged?"
"Busted tire and a bent prop. I was running some spare machine parts up to Moose Creek. They were wanted urgently, so they'll probably refuse to give me any future work. I've let them down once or twice already. No fault of my own, you can be sure."
Biggles bit his lip thoughtfully. It's too late to get the stuff up to them today, he said slowly.
But I think this is our best plan. We'll put all your cargo into my machine and fly it back to Fort Beaver. Tomorrow, Ginger and I will take it to Moose Creek. Smith and Algy had better stay here and get to work on your machine. There's nothing you can't fix up, is there, Smith? Oh, I don't think so, sir. Good. Algy, as soon as the machine is ready, fly her back to Fort Beaver. I'll fly low of you tomorrow on my way to Moose Creek, but I'll only land if you signal me to do so. Come on, then, let's get to work. There's no time to waste. It took them, all working hard, about half an hour to transfer the freight from the damaged machine to the Jupiter. And once this was done, Biggles lost no time in getting off, for the sun was already low over the western hills. In a few minutes, the Jupiter was roaring back over her tracks. In spite of the fact that Biggles flew on full throttle nearly all the way, it was practically dark when the scattered lights of Fort Beaver came into sight. Suddenly, Biggles stared ahead through the windscreen. Are those landing flares on the aerodrome, or am I dreaming? He jerked out. The flares, declared a surprised Wilkes. Well, I've never known McBain do that before. Biggles said nothing, but a curious expression came over his face as he stared intently into the gloom. A moment or two later, he cut the engines and glided down towards the lights, only to open up again an instant later and roar up into the darkening sky. McBain must take me for a fool, he snarled savagely. Why? To fall into such an elementary trap as the one he set. Those lights are in the wrong place. Had I landed up the line, I should have bashed straight into our hangar. Ginger, drop a signal flare and let's have a look at things. I'd rather trust my own eyes than McBain's flares. Cunning hound. The signal light burst below the Jupiter, flooding the earth with its brilliant glare, and the trap was exposed to view. Biggles made no further remarks, but concentrated his attention on bringing the Jupiter down safely. Taxiing swiftly up to the shed, he opened the cabin door and jumped down. Not a soul was in sight, and the flares had disappeared. Without speaking, they pushed the machine safely into the hangar. Well, fix up quarters here in the hangar, said Biggles. Then the machine will always be in sight. Now, I'm hungry. Wilkes, where'd you get your food supplies? Oh, down in the village. There's only one place you can get grub, the 3-Star Saloon. Then Ginger and I'll go down and lay in a stock. Will you be all right here on your own? Oh, why not? Replied Wilkes. I had to handle things by myself for some time now. It was a walk of about 2 miles to the cluster of log huts that formed the village of Fort Beaver. There was no mistaking the 3-Star Saloon, for 3 lanterns hung at regular intervals along the front, enabling the sign to be read. Biggles pushed open the door, and a loud buzz of conversation met his ears. The saloon was lit by several smoky paraffin lamps, around which eddied a mist of rank tobacco smoke. "Give it a name, strangers," said the barman. While Ginger ordered a couple of drinks, Biggles took an old envelope from his pocket and started jotting down selected items from the goods he saw exposed for sale. Bread, biscuits, coffee, beans, and the like. Several men, trappers or prospectors, judging from their clothes, were seated nearby, engaged in conversation, but Biggles paid them no attention until a name caught his ears. The name was Wilkinson, pronounced Wilkson by the man who had uttered it. He was an old man and was dressed in the traditional fur jacket of a prospector. Around his neck was wound a white spotted red scarf, held together incongruously with a distinctive opal-headed tie-pin.
"Yep, trust my partner Angus Sterling to think of something for me to do,"
continued the old man in a wheezy voice, as Biggles regarded him with sudden interest.
"I'm pulling out tomorrow, and I near forgot. If you see that fellow Wilkson," says Angus, "tell him I forgot to give him that land transfer. But I still got it. Now I guess I've got to trail across to that pesky aerodrome."
Biggles butted in. "Excuse me, you're Angus Sterling's partner?"
"Sure am, stranger. Mose is my name. Me and Angus is working a claim on Eskimo Island."
"I'm a friend of Captain Wilkinson. Is it correct that Angus asked you to tell Wilkinson that he still has the transfer of the land he sold him?"
That's right enough."
"I'm glad to hear it," Biggles continued. "We need that paper badly. How far away is this Eskimo Island?"
"Oh, about 1,500 miles due north, I guess. I'm going back there tomorrow."
"I'm flying north to Moose Creek tomorrow," said Biggles. "If you care to come along, it should save you some time." Maybe we could go right on to your claim. A childish grin spread slowly over the old man's face.
You mean you take me up in an airplane?
That's right.
Will there be room for the grub?
Mose inquired.
I've a fair load, enough to last me and Angus through the freeze-up.
You can take anything up to a ton, returned Biggles.
Oh, well, I ain't got that much. Mister, you got a deal.
Be at the aerodrome, then, at the crack of dawn. See you in the morning. Biggles settled the bill, and subconsciously aware that a curious silence had fallen on the room, reached for his drink. Simultaneously there was a deafening roar, and the glass burst into smithereens. For a moment Biggles stared with startled eyes at the spot where his glass had been. Then, recovering quickly, he looked around. At the far end of the bar stood McBain, a bottle of whiskey in one hand, and a smoking revolver in the other. No one spoke. The only sound in the room was the soft shuffle of feet as the other men in the bar began to back away out of the line of fire. Unhurriedly, Biggles turned a reflective eye on McBain, who was now holding a glass in one hand, while the revolver, an almost imperceptible coil of smoke creeping from the muzzle, and the bottle of whiskey rested on the bar in front of him. "Give me another drink, boss, will you?" requested Biggles quietly, and put his hand in his pocket as if to take out the money to pay for it. McBain stood his glass on the bar. His hand moved towards the revolver, but on this occasion things did not go in accordance with his plan. Biggles' hand jerked out of his pocket. There was a double report, the two shots coming so close together they almost sounded like one. There was a crash of shattering glass, and a metallic ping as McBain's bottle of whiskey splintered into 100 pieces, and his revolver spun along the polished bar before falling behind it. "What's the matter, McBain?" asked Biggles evenly. "Any fool can play a game single-handed. You don't mind me joining in, surely?" Biggles addressed the barkeeper. "What is the usual procedure in a case like this, in this part of the world?" he inquired. "Do I shoot him?"
"Hey, wait a minute," snapped the bartender. "I don't want no shooting here."
"I didn't start it," Biggles pointed out.
"No, I know you didn't."
"I'd better plug him and rid the world of a dirty beast," suggested Biggles, wondering at the back of his mind why McBain's friends did not take a hand. Snatching a glance in their direction, he understood. Ginger's automatic was covering them. How the matter would have ended, it's impossible to say, but at that moment the outside door was flung open, and Delaney the police constable stood on the threshold, a carbine in his hands. "What's the shooting?" he inquired bluntly. "Only me and McBain, seeing who can spill most liquor," replied Biggles. "You two at it again?" The constable's eyes went from one to the other. "Who pulled first?" he demanded.
McBain! He shot his drink! Shouted old Mose shrilly. "I seen it!"
"Any more shooting between you two, and I'll throw you both in jail," declared the constable.
"Quite right," murmured Biggles, putting his automatic back in his pocket. "Come on, Ginger, grab those supplies and let's be going." As they went out, Biggles nodded to Mose. "See you at daybreak," he called. Then the door closed behind them, and they hurried back to the aerodrome. On their return to the hangar, Biggles reported the shooting incident in full to Wilkes. "But what's more important," he continued quickly, "we've got on the track of Angus Sterling. He's working a claim up north on Eskimo Island with an old fellow named Mose. Mose is here in Fort Beaver collecting winter stores, and Angus sent a message to you to the effect that he's got the land transfer. You can have it when you want." Wilkes sprang to his feet.
"Ooh, that in our possession? We can give McBain his marching orders."
Biggles nodded. "That's the way I see it. So I've arranged to fly Mose back to the claim tomorrow. We'll land first at Moose Creek, where I'll dump the freight for the gold people. Mose will meet us here at dawn." A shadow of anxiety crossed Wilkes's face.
"You said, McBain was there," he muttered. "If he knows about this, he may try to stop Mose."
"Well, I think he knows, but I don't see what he can do," answered Biggles thoughtfully. "Anyway, all we want tomorrow is a fine day. Algy and Smith should be back with the other machine, and the next day we shall be back with the transfer. Then we'll see what McBain has to say. I wonder what the weather's doing." "I'll go and have a look," offered Ginger, and leaving the table, walked slowly out of the hangar door.
20 minutes later, Ginger had not returned. The others were just starting out to look for him when suddenly he burst through the door.
"Where the dickens have you been?" snapped Biggles tersely.
Ginger's manner was abrupt as he waved them back to the table. "I've been indulging in a very questionable pastime. Some people might call it eavesdropping, but in time of war like this, the best people call it scouting. I've been listening in at McBain's hut across the field. McBain himself wasn't there at first, but he arrived later, looking somewhat agitated, I may add. But Wilkes, if you think those guys are here simply to run you off your aerodrome, you're wrong." There was a moment's silence. "What are they after?" Biggles almost hissed the words. Ginger drained a cup of cold coffee before replying. "Gold," he said quickly. "The little bags of yellow metal from Moose Creek." Wilkes nodded slowly.
"Oh, kick me, somebody," he said weakly. "I never even thought of that."
The stars were still twinkling in the sky when, the following morning, Biggles, Wilkes and Ginger pulled the Jupiter out of the shed. While they were waiting for Mose, they discussed the new aspect of Ginger's scouting expedition the previous night.
"It would be no use telling Delaney without proof," remarked Biggles quietly. "He'd think that we were just shooting a cock-and-bull story to put McBain & Co. under suspicion."
"How about warning the people at Moose Creek?" suggested Wilkes.
"They'd be less likely to believe us than Delaney," declared Biggles. "They would think it a scheme to put McBain out of the airline business. They might even tell McBain we'd reported them as crooks. Then we'd never be able to expose him. No, at this juncture we say nothing to anybody."
Biggles glanced at his wristwatch as he finished speaking.
"Oh, Mose is late," he observed.
"Who's this coming?" asked Ginger, staring in the direction of the village.
"Looks like Delaney." "Yes, it is him," declared Biggles.
A minute later the Mountie pulled up his horse and dismounted beside the waiting airman. His eyes rested on Biggles' face. "Where did you go after you left the 3-star last night?" he asked crisply. Biggles raised his eyebrows.
"Ginger and I came straight back here. Wilkes can verify when we got back." "What's this all about, anyway?"
"What were you three standing here for when I came along? You looked as if you were expecting somebody." "We were," agreed Biggles. "We'd arranged to fly Angus Sterling's partner Mose back to their claim. Between ourselves, Delaney, Angus has got the transfer for this property. If we get it, we can give McBain the run-along."
"Well, Mose won't be coming," said the constable slowly. "He's dead."
Biggles paled.
"Dead?" he cried incredulously. "Why, he was as right as rain last night."
"No doubt he would have been this morning, too. Someone hadn't clubbed his brains out."
"You mean he was murdered?"
"People don't beat their own brains out."
Biggles' mind raced as he tried to focus the situation in its new aspect.
"Well, we had nothing to gain by his death," he pointed out. "We want that transfer badly. By gosh, things look bad for Angus. Mose was taking up their winter grub."
"If Angus is somewhere on Eskimo Island, he'll be snowed in for 6 months come the freeze-up."
"He'll starve," said Delaney. "I'll take the grub up," stated Biggles.
"Then you've no time to waste," said Delaney harshly. "The snow's on the way, but one of you stay here, in case I want you. I'll go and have a word with McBain."
With a curt nod, the constable led his horse towards McBain's shed, where McBain himself and his crew were now pulling an aeroplane from the hangar. As soon as Delaney was out of earshot, Ginger swung round to Biggles. "McBain must have killed him," he whispered tensely. "Remember, last night. I told you he came in when I was eavesdropping, very late and very agitated. He must have done it."
"I wonder," murmured Biggles. "Well, if he did, he certainly had a motive. By killing the old man, he might have reckoned on stopping us making contact with Angus. Question is, does McBain know that we know Angus is on Eskimo Island? There's no use guessing anyway. The first thing we've got to do is get poor old Moses Grubstake up here, then to Angus, if we can find him."
The business of fetching Angus's winter supplies occupied some time, for it meant a journey to the village. By the time Biggles and Ginger got back to the aerodrome, Delaney had gone. So had one of McBain's Wankel 12 transports.
"It took off about 20 minutes ago," explained Wilkes. "Headed north with Sarton flying and Chico alongside."
Biggles nodded and climbed into the cabin of the Jupiter. En route to Moose Creek, Biggles roared low over Wilkes's rock heed, but receiving an OK signal from Algy, he did not land. Biggles tilted the Jupiter's nose upwards as he climbed to his original height and settled down for the long journey to Moose Creek. The sun was hanging low over the western mountains when Biggles saw what he knew must be the goldfield. On the banks of a wide creek were clustered a number of huts with corrugated iron roofs. Near them the ground was flat, and as they glided down they were able to discern wheel tracks, indicating where machines usually landed. The place could hardly be called an aerodrome. In 10 minutes they had taxied up to the buildings, where a man in a fur jacket was waiting for them. "Are you Canwell?" called Biggles, guessing it was the traffic manager.
"No, you said it,"
was the curt reply.
"You seen anything of Wilkinson?"
"Yes, I'm his new partner. I've brought your stuff along."
"Oh, about time, too."
"We had some trouble, but we're all set now for regular service," Biggles promised him. Canwell blew a whistle, at which some men appeared and began unloading the equipment.
"I've just had one of McBean's machines here,"
he told Biggles. It struck Biggles as odd that they hadn't seen the Winkle on its homeward journey, but he didn't comment on it. "What did they want, sir?" he inquired.
"They offered to carry all my stuff at 15 cents a pound."
Biggles was taken aback at this cut rate, but his face remained expressionless. "I'll do it at 12 cents.
"Sounds fair to me,"
said Canwell.
"I aim to have a shipment boxed ready for tomorrow, so you can take it. You be staying here tonight?"
Biggles looked at the sun.
"Well, how much daylight have I got left?" "About a week to 10 days, I reckon."
Enlightenment burst upon Biggles. He realized they were so far north that the sun did not drop below the horizon until it went for good in the long winter months. "Of course, the midnight sun!" he exclaimed. "How far is it to Eskimo Island?"
"Oh, about 500 miles due north."
"Good. We can make it there and back in time." Canwell's eyes narrowed.
"Whatever happens, that metal has got to go to Fort Beaver tomorrow."
"You mean if I'm not here, then McBain takes it?"
"That's precisely what I mean. See you tomorrow."
Biggles and Ginger climbed into their seats to resume the flight northward. "The thing that beats me," muttered Biggles as he started the engines, "is how Sarton got back without us seeing him." "He might have gone on to where we're going," suggested Ginger. Biggles started. "Gosh, I never thought of that." A minute or two later, the big machine was nosing up in the sky, which had taken on a dull, leaden hue. "Look at that," remarked Biggles. "It's going to snow before long, and when it starts, it'll snow for a long, long time." Ginger shivered suddenly, conscious of a terrifying solitude. He was about to remark on this to Biggles when a sound reached his ears that caused every muscle in his body to stiffen. He knew what it was immediately. It was the unmistakable rattle of a machine gun. Before he could even move, the sound came again, this time much more distinctly, and simultaneously the Jupiter quivered as if it had been struck by a cat of nine tails. Ginger's throat turned dry, and the next instant he was clinging desperately to his seat as the Jupiter soared upwards in a wild, climbing turn. Bracing himself against the side of the cabin, he looked out of the window, just in time to see a Winkle transport go tearing past. The window nearest to him was open, and from it projected what appeared to be a short black stick, at the end of which danced a vicious streak of flame. "Use the signal pistol! It's all we've got!" Biggles' voice was like cracking ice. His face was white and his eyes glittered curiously. "I'll try to put you in a position for a shot. If you can hit him, it may set him alight. You might hit a prop." A signal pistol against a machine gun? Even Ginger was experienced enough to know the odds were nearly hopeless. "Need we stop and fight?" he asked tersely. "They've got the legs of us by 10 miles an hour," was the curt reply. "Use the pistol." Ginger snatched the large board pistol from its pocket and thrust a thick cartridge into its breech. There was only one cartridge remaining, and this he pushed into his pocket. "I'm going outside," he said tersely. "Well, hang on tight. I may have to throw the machine about." Another moment, and Ginger had flung back the emergency trap in the roof and was climbing halfway out. The icy blast of the slipstream smote his face and tore at his body, and he knew that he would not be able to endure the exposure for long without becoming frozen. He looked around and saw the attacking machine on the opposite side of a narrow circle, round which both aircraft were racing. Ginger flinched as he heard a burst of bullets strike the Jupiter somewhere near the tail. In the next few minutes, Biggles twice took the big machine into position for a shot, but each time the tearing slipstream spoiled Ginger's aim. He had only 2 cartridges, and determined to make the most of them. His first chance came when Biggles whirled like lightning and tore straight under the winkle, so close that Ginger instinctively ducked. He fired straight up, but the resultant ball of green fire went slap through the fabric, making a neat hole which did not affect the winkle's performance. With the tears that the icy blast forced from his eyes freezing on his cheeks, he thrust the last cartridge into the breech. He had to put the pistol into his pocket and hang on with both hands, while Biggles did an Immelmann turn. But he grabbed the weapon again as the Jupiter came out in the position this manoeuvre is designed to effect, on the tail of the opposing machine. Ginger clenched his teeth, and taking deliberate aim, fired. To his dismay, the cartridge misfired. He fired again. Once more, the expected report failed to occur. By this time, the Jupiter was almost immediately above the winkle and fast overhauling it. Ginger did the only thing left for him to do. He flung the now useless pistol. At the same moment, Biggles dragged the Jupiter away, and Ginger, half dead with cold, slid back into the cabin. "Missed!" he shouted to Biggles. "No more cartridges. But can you put us in that position again? I've just had an idea." Biggles merely nodded. He did not seem in the least perturbed. Ginger staggered back into the main cabin, from where he returned an instant later, carrying a foot-square box, branded with bold black letters, 20-pound corned beef, stow away from engines. Not without difficulty, Ginger dragged this unwieldy weapon up into his recently held position. Biggles had already begun the Immelmann, which starts with a steep climbing turn, so it seemed to Ginger that the world was spinning with a dizzy speed. Raising himself on one knee, he waited while the 2 machines closed up as though drawn by an invisible magnet. Twice he heard the crack of a bullet boring through the Jupiter. Then, as they swooped low over the winkle, he flung the heavy box outwards and downwards with all his force. His eyes never left the box, and he followed its course with a morbid fascination. The box struck the winkle's wing about 4 feet from the tip, causing the whole wingtip to crumple up like tissue paper. For a second or two, the plane zoomed this way and that, and an instant later, the winkle was spinning earthward. In fascinated horror, Ginger watched it go. He saw the damaged wing balloon and rip off at the roots. He saw the fuselage spin faster and faster, saw the half-breed flung out and go plunging down, clutching vainly at air. The winkle hit the snow and crumpled into 1,000 fragments. A great pillar of fire leapt heavenwards. White-faced, he fell back weakly into the cabin. Biggles turned an expressionless face towards him. "They got what they asked for," he said grimly. "Good work, laddie. You'll find some hot coffee in the thermos. You look as if you need it." For some minutes neither of them spoke. Ginger gulped the hot coffee and began a vigorous massage of his face and hands to restore circulation. He had not expected any great praise from Biggles for what he had done, which didn't mean that Biggles didn't appreciate it. Biggles himself did whatever circumstances demanded. Algy the same. At last Biggles spoke. "We'd better start looking out for Eskimo Island," he observed. "But how on earth we're going to tell where it is, I'm dashed if I know. Everything's frozen, and some snow must have fallen too. You can't tell which is land and which is water. So keep a sharp look—" Biggles broke off abruptly as the port engine spluttered, picked up, and spluttered again. Suddenly it cut out, dead. A horrid suspicion flashed into Ginger's mind. Looking back into the main cabin, his face turned ashen. "It's petrol!" he cried. "It's slopping everywhere! The main tank must be holed!" Even as he spoke, the second engine died out. A weird silence fell, broken only by the faint whine of the wind over the wings. Biggles flattened out to land, with a feeling that the dead flat white surface looked almost too good to be true. But nothing untoward happened, and the wheels ran through the snow with a gentle hissing sound. Then, very slowly, in the still twilight air, The machine came to rest. For a while, neither of them spoke. The cold was intense. Ginger shivered. "Well," he said, "what do we do next?" "To tell the truth, laddie, I was just wondering," replied Biggles. "As I see it, we've got two fairly sound chances. The first is that Algy and Wilkes will come to look for us in the Rockheed, and the second is that we shall see or hear something of Angus. We must be somewhere near Eskimo Island." "That's true enough," acknowledged Ginger. "Gosh, it's—" He broke off suddenly, staring at the sky. "Why, look! There's a searchlight!" he cried. "Must be Algy! There's another! 3, 4! Why, there's a dozen! What the dickens is going on?" Biggles laughed. "I should say it's the aurora borealis." Ginger nodded. "Oh, of course, the northern lights! My goodness! Look how the colours change!" "But that isn't the aurora borealis!" he cried emphatically, pointing in the direction of a distant ridge. "That's yellow lamplight." "Where?" "That's funny. It's gone now," said Ginger in a puzzled voice. "You see those two peaks? It seemed to be at the foot of those. I'm absolutely certain." All right, I'll take your word for it," said Biggles. "If you're right, could only be Angus. Those peaks must be Eskimo Island. What a stroke of luck." It took Biggles and Ginger 3 hours of long, hard slog before they reached their objective. Biggles eyed the peaks with disfavour. All around was a land of death, as devoid of life as the earth must once have been. He looked ahead at a tiny object, floating feather-like in the still air. "Snow," he said grimly. "We'd better find Angus pretty soon, or else." Biggles put his hand into his pocket and took out his automatic. Pointing the muzzle in the air, he fired 3 times at regular intervals. Ginger flinched as the shots crashed out like a salvo of artillery. "Gosh!" he murmured in an awestruck voice, as the echoes finally rolled away. "If Angus is within 50 miles, he'll hear that." Biggles smiled. "Yeah, a little hectic, wasn't it?" They set off again, following the foot of the peaks, pausing from time to time to listen and rest. They had covered perhaps 100 yards this way, with big flakes of snow falling regularly, when Ginger suddenly pulled up short. "There's something moving up ahead," he said quietly. "Stand fast," came the swift answer. "It's a polar bear. Gosh, what a monster!" The bear, an enormous shaggy brute that looked grey in the half-light, saw them. Instantly it raised itself on its hind legs and let out a deep, snarling growl. "Look out, it's coming!" jerked out Biggles. "Don't run! Wait till he gets close and make every shot count!" With his heart hammering against his ribs, Ginger whipped out his automatic and waited as the great beast came on. At a distance of 5 or 6 yards, Biggles fired. But it did nothing to stop the beast's berserk progress. Biggles blazed point-blank at the pointed head. Then, in his haste to step aside, he slipped and measured his length in the snow. In a flash, the bear was over him. Ginger's one conscious thought was that he must save Biggles. Hardly knowing what he was doing, he rushed up to the bear. The next instant, a huge, hairy paw caught him a sweeping blow on the shoulder, and he went over backwards. A sickening stench of bear filled his nostrils. A roaring, crashing report almost deafened him, then a great weight settled on his body, crushing the life out of him. Something seized him by the arm, and he screamed, thinking it was the bear's huge jaws. Then the scene seemed to change, and he found himself on his feet, panting and muttering incoherently. "Och, now, take it easy," said a strange voice in a strong Scots accent. Ginger stared at a short, broad-shouldered figure with a smoking rifle in the crook of its arm. Suddenly he understood. "You're Angus Sterling," he blurted out. It was not far to the old Scotsman's cabin. "I've got some bad news for you, Angus," Biggles said grimly. "Mose won't be coming back."
"Aye, that means he's dead."
Biggles nodded. "Quite right. He was murdered." And he told Angus the whole story, how they heard Mose inquiring for Wilkes and the events that followed. When he had finished, the old man stared at the fire in silence.
"Aye, poor old Mose,"
he said at last.
"Aye, I know, Brindle. It's bad medicine. It was mighty kind of you to come up here, mister. But here you'll stay, I reckon.
And since you're liable to be stopping, I'll tell you something.
Mose was a rich man. Aye, me and Mose struck it rich.
Biggles looked surprised.
You mean you found gold?
Aye, man. Mose had a tidy poke here.
You're a power of good it'll do him now.
Well, for us it all depends on the weather.
Angus crossed to the door and flung it open. Outside it was no longer snowing, and the world lay still and white under a cold blue dome.
This looks like a chance to bring the grub up from your aeroplane. Yeah, it's a bit of luck, the snow holding off like this. If it starts again, your plane will be buried before long. We've got to make the most of it.
By the time they arrived at the Jupiter, Ginger had lost all count of time. Not that it really mattered now. In future, the weather would rule their actions, and not the clock. Vaguely he wondered what Algy and Wilkes were doing, but once the snow started again, it would put an end to any idea of rescue. He thought no more about it, but set to work with the others unloading the stores. This done, he was about to suggest to Biggles that they drain off the Jupiter's oil, when he heard the distant hum of an aeroplane. The sound was unmistakable, and his heart leapt. "Good old Algy!" he shouted gleefully. "There he is," declared Biggles, pointing at a black speck that had materialized out of the dull haze concealing the southern horizon. "He's seen us," went on Biggles joyfully. "I saw him turn. He's coming." And then his voice died away in a curious manner. Ginger, staring at the fast-approaching machine, knew why. It was not Wilkes's Rockheed. It was McBain's second Winkle that was roaring low towards them. To say that Ginger was flabbergasted would be to express his feelings mildly. He was thunderstruck. The possibility of this development had not occurred to him. Ginger turned to Biggles, who was staring at the oncoming machine with disgust. "He was looking for Sarton, I expect," he muttered. Biggles nodded. "He's spotted who we are," he said bitterly. "It'll be interesting to see what he does." The Winkle banked sharply and, putting its nose down, dived at the stranded Jupiter. Biggles let out a warning yell. "Lie flat!" Above the bellow of the Winkle's engines there came the vicious chatter of a machine gun, and a line of ice splinters and flecks of snow leapt into the air. As it swept past, Ginger clearly saw McBain himself behind the gun, which was thrust through a side window of the control cabin. "Keep down!" shouted Biggles, seeing that the Winkle was coming back. This time, as the Winkle hurtled past, the gun was silent. Instead, a small square object crashed down near the Jupiter, bouncing over and over again. A signal light shot from the Winkle, cutting a flaming line through the air, and struck the snow near the object. A sheet of flame leapt upwards. "It's petrol!" yelled Biggles. "He's trying to burn the Jupiter!" 2 gallons of petrol make a considerable flame, and the whole scene was bathed in a lurid glow. But it was soon clear that in this case the Jupiter would not be damaged. Owing to the snow, the petrol did not spread far, and the flame was 10 yards from the machine. For the next few seconds, the movements of the Winkle puzzled the watchers on the ground. The plane turned away sharply and began climbing steeply. "I think he's going," said Biggles, rising to his feet. "No, that isn't it," cried Ginger. "Look!" Biggles followed the direction indicated. What he saw made him catch his breath sharply. "It's Algy," he muttered hoarsely. Heading straight towards the scene was a Rockheed freighter, attracted, no doubt, by the signal flare and fire. "I don't think Algy's seen the Winkle," muttered Ginger in a hopeless voice. "He's probably got his eyes fixed on us," returned Biggles tersely. Helpless, they could only stand and watch. The Winkle climbed straight up under the tail of the Rockheed, which was gliding down slowly, looking for a place to land. An arm appeared out of the window, waving, making it obvious that those inside had not the slightest suspicion of danger. The watchers on the ground saw the whole thing clearly. They saw McBain take slow and careful aim, saw the jabbing tongues of flame dance from the muzzle, saw the Rockheed shiver as the burst of fire hit her. The Rockheed dropped the port wing, stalled, came out again, and stalled again, obviously out of control. Then, as if by a miracle, the machine righted itself and turned sluggishly towards them. The reason for this apparent miracle became revealed. Algy was out on the starboard wing, lying flat and clinging to the leading edge, in an attempt to counterbalance the sagging port wing. The Rockheed swept down like a tired bird. The port wing tip sagged again and touched the ground momentarily. The whole machine cartwheeled, flinging Algy over and over across the snow. The fuselage tipped up, hanging poised for a moment, then fell back. Movement ceased. The Winkle, its engines roaring triumphantly, swept up into the sky and levelled out, its nose pointing south. Neither Biggles or Ginger paid it any attention as they raced towards the crashed machine. "Get Algy! I'll look after Wilkes!" yelled Biggles. His great fear was that the machine would go up in flames. He tore open the cabin door and disappeared inside. Ginger went on to Algy. "Algy, old man, are you badly hurt?" Algy managed to get up on his hands and knees.
"I'm only
"Winded," he stammered. "Gosh, how's Wilkes? Is he hurt?" By now Biggles had managed to get Wilkes out of the wreckage. He was sitting nearby, very pale, while Biggles mopped blood from a cut in his forehead. Angus was winding a bandage tightly round his left wrist, which he had sprained slightly. "How's Algy?" Biggles asked as Ginger ran over. "Oh, not bad, apart from being winded." "The snow probably broke his fall," returned Biggles shortly. Algy, his back slightly bent, came limping over to them. "I've had enough of this farthest north stuff. Do you see that skunk McBain shoot us down?" he said bitterly. "He was having a go at us when you arrived." "Did he shoot you down too?" asked Algy. "No, Sarton was responsible for that. He's down, dead, and Chico with him." Briefly, Biggles described all that had transpired since he had left Algy and Smith to repair the damaged Rockheed.
Well, what are we going to do now?
asked Wilkes when Biggles had finished recounting his story.
Looks like we're here for the winter.
"I'm not so sure about that," put in Biggles. "We may have a chance yet. Have you plenty of juice in your tanks?"
50 gallons, I reckon."
Biggles grinned. "Then if we mend the hole in our tank and swap the petrol over, we can get back in the Jupiter. We've got a pair of landing skis inside. If we jack up the undercart and put the skis on, we might still do it, if the snow holds off a little longer." Algy sprang to his feet, his stiffness forgotten. "Let's get at it," he cried. "It's our only chance." "Find that bullet hole, Ginger," Biggles ordered. "It's a race against time now." For 3 hours the airman and Angus worked feverishly, being impeded to no small extent by the cold. Ginger repaired the punctured tank, bemoaning the fact that Smith, an expert metal worker, was not there to help him. Algy explained that he had left Smith at Fort Beaver when they had arrived as arranged in the Rockheed. He was guarding the sheds. At long last it was done, and the transformation of the Jupiter into an airworthy ski plane was complete. "Is there anything at the cabin you'll be wanting?" Biggles asked Angus. "I take it you'll be coming with us."
Oh, no, man. I'm staying here.
Biggles shrugged his shoulders. "All right, you know best what you want to do. We'll taxi you and your stores back to the shack and pick up the transfer. We'll get away before it starts to snow." Angus cocked an eye heavenward and saw 1 or 2 big flakes floating downward languidly. "I have no time to waste," he observed dispassionately. "Here she comes." It took them some time to start the cold engines, but a little petrol, inserted in the cylinders, finally did the trick, and the Jupiter began gliding across the snow towards the cabin. By the time Angus's stores were thrown out, the old man had returned from the shack with the precious transfer and a small sack. "What's that?" yelled Biggles.
Old Moses Poke!
"Gold!" shouted Angus.
He's got a daughter down in Vancouver. Will you find her and give it to her?"
"All right," shouted Biggles. "Stand clear." The parting wave to the old Scotsman, and the Jupiter swung round and raced across the snow. A moment later it rose slowly into the air, heading south for Moose Creek. Within 10 minutes the snow began to thin, and they caught their first sight of the ground. Shortly afterwards they ran into clear weather, although the landscape was still snow-covered. "Pity we've lost the Rockheed," Biggles remarked. "That leaves us only the one machine."
"Oh, never mind, we've got the transfer," Wilkes reminded him. "By the way, what are we going to do about McBain? He tried to murder us."
"Yeah, it's hard to know what to do," replied Biggles thoughtfully. "Still our word against his. We've got a witness in Angus, but he won't be available now for 6 months. Whatever else happens, McBain will get a shock when we turn up. He thinks we're out of the way for the winter. Possibly for good. They said no more, for it was obvious that the future was so problematical that it was impossible to make plans with any assurance. The snow on the ground was by now very patchy, and as they approached Moose Creek it died away altogether. Within a few days the snow coming down from the north would bury everything under a deep blanket, but for the present the ground was clear.
"There's a chance that the creek will be frozen over," remarked Wilkes. "The ice is safe. They shift the windstocking across to it."
"Well, that's better," replied Biggles. "I wasn't too happy at trying to put this bus down in a frozen field on a pair of skis." As the Jupiter circled Moose Creek, they could see that Wilkes's assumption was correct, and that the frozen creek now acted as an aerodrome. Biggles concentrated on putting the Jupiter down on her new type of undercarriage, a landing no different from usual, except that the machine ran a long way before coming to a standstill. There was no sign of McBain's winkle. Leaving the others to attend to refuelling and the replacement of the undercarriage wheels, Biggles walked across to the traffic manager's office. Canwell looked up from his desk as Biggles entered.
Sorry, he said. You're just too late to take the gold to Fort Beaver."
Biggles nodded slowly. "So it's gone?"
"Yep, biggest shipment we ever made. I waited as long as I could, but McBain blew in, so I let him take it. He's only been gone about 10 minutes. I'm sorry."
Biggles shrugged. "Righto, then. See you later." He walked slowly to the door, but once outside strode swiftly to the Jupiter. "McBain's got away with the boodle," he said crisply. "He's got 10 minutes start, but he'll probably be cruising. If we run on full throttle, we may overhaul him. Get aboard, step on it." Not until the Jupiter was in the air, soaring southwards on the trail of the Winkle, did Biggles settle down to contemplate the situation. The gold was temporarily in McBain's charge, and if he intended stealing it, this was his opportunity. The more Biggles thought about it, the more he became convinced that, unless he overtook the Winkle, he would never see McBain or the gold again. Ginger suddenly pushed his way into the cabin. "Starboard!" he yelled. "The Winkle's bearing west!" Biggles did not answer. For a moment or two his eyes studied the sky, section by section, before they settled on a moving speck, travelling on a southwesterly course, at a slightly lower altitude than themselves. "McBain isn't going to Fort Beaver," Biggles said crisply. "He's leaving it miles to the east." As he spoke, he brought the Jupiter round to follow the other machine. For an hour the respective positions of the two machines did not change. Biggles kept at a safe distance, quite satisfied to watch. Eventually he saw the Winkle start to lose height rapidly. It seemed only a matter of minutes before it would land. Once it was on the ground, with its engines stopped, the noise of the Jupiter would give them away. Biggles' brain raced as he studied the ground intently. It was empty, open prairie, broken only by areas of fir forest. But he noticed that the locality in which the Winkle looked as if it would land was slightly lower than the surrounding ground. It struck him that if he put the Jupiter down behind one of the patches of timber on the higher land, they could see without being seen. He cut the engines, and soon the Jupiter was trundling over some springy turf, the machine screened by a line of spruce and fir trees. The aeroplane had barely come to a standstill before Biggles was out. Ducking low under the drooping fir branches, they saw they were about a mile from the Winkle, which was now standing by a small log cabin. It so happened, however, that the Winkle was between them and the cabin, so although they could see figures moving, they could not see exactly what was going on. "I should say they're unloading the gold," declared Ginger. "I don't think there's any doubt about that," returned Biggles. Several minutes passed, during which no more was said. Then, to their surprise, the Winkle's engines roared, and almost before the watchers realized what was happening, the machine had taken off and was racing low over a southeasterly course. The cabin appeared to be deserted. "Gosh, we'll lose them! Come on!" And suiting the action to the words, Biggles led the mad rush back to the Jupiter.
3 minutes they were in the air again, but the Winkle had had 5 minutes clear start. There was no sign of it.
"They were heading southeast, towards Fort Beaver," Algy pointed out. I know. But I don't get the hang of this at all," muttered Biggles with a worried frown. "If they've stolen the gold, they've got a bit of a nerve to go back to Fort Beaver. It's got me beat, and that's a fact."
Half an hour later, Fort Beaver Aerodrome was in sight.
"There's the Winkle," said Biggles as he cut the engines. "And that's McBain and Ferroni beside it, and yes, that's Delaney."
Their run-in carried them very close to the Winkle. A strange expression crept over Biggles' face, but he made no observation until he had switched off in front of the hangar.
"Well," he said, in an odd tone of voice, "what do you make of that?"
"Make of what?" asked the others together.
"Look, they're unloading the Moose Creek gold boxes," went on Biggles. "They haven't stolen the gold after all."
He passed his hand wearily over his face and shook his head.
"That knocks all our calculations sideways, doesn't it? I mean, they've actually had the gold in their possession with nothing to prevent them getting cleared away with it. Yet they bring it back here and calmly hand it over like law-abiding citizens. We'd better go inside and put our thinking caps on."
For the remainder of the day and far into the night, they discussed the problem with no apparent solution. At daybreak, they resumed the debate, but Biggles broke off long enough to send Smith to the village shopping. Then he continued.
"All this talk of gold reminds me. We've still got Moses' poke of gold dust in our machine. We'd better put it somewhere safe till we can hand it over to the authorities. I don't feel inclined to tear around at this moment looking for Moses' daughter. We'll tell Delaney about it next time he comes up here."
"There's a secret cavity under my office floor," said Wilkes. "I had it specially made for valuables."
The small bag of gold was accordingly fetched from the machine and put into Wilkes's hiding place. The task done, they returned to the tarmac.
"Go and brew a dish of coffee, Ginger," said Biggles. "I reckon we could all do with a cup."
Ginger nodded and made his way to the back of the hangar where the cooking stove had been installed. The others were still waiting for the coffee when, to Biggles' astonishment, Constable Delaney appeared, walking towards them, followed by McBain and Ferroni.
"What the dickens do they want?" growled Algy. "We shall soon know," murmured Biggles. "Morning, Delaney," he called cheerfully.
The constable, carbine across his arm, came to a halt a couple of paces away and regarded the 3 airmen with an expression of shrewd suspicion. His eyes came to rest on Wilkes.
"Any objection to my searching your outfit? I'm searching it anyway."
Wilkes waved a conscience-free hand.
"Oh, help yourself," he said.
"You've had a look around McBain's outfit for whatever it is you've lost, I presume?" put in Biggles.
Delaney threw him a sidelong glance.
"I have, and I found nothing," he admitted.
"Well, you won't find it here."
"You talk like you know what I'm looking for," stated Delaney.
"If I had one guess, and if I hadn't seen the boxes being unloaded yesterday, I should say it's the Moose Creek bullion. But you won't find gold here." "Funny thing, though," went on Biggles easily. "I should have thought that if those boxes had been empty, you'd have noticed it yesterday."
"They weren't open till they got to Edmonton," returned the constable curtly. "They were full of lead." In a flash, Biggles understood the meaning of McBain's detour. The gold had been removed from the boxes at the isolated cabin, and lead substituted. There was one thing he could not understand, though.
"I thought the boxes were always sealed at Moose Creek."
"Quite right," returned the constable. "And the seals were intact when the boxes were taken out of McBain's machine."
"I don't see how or where we could have got near the gold," protested Biggles.
"You're the only other outfit, besides McBain's, that was at Moose Creek yesterday, and here. You're under suspicion till the dust is found," said Delaney firmly.
While he had been speaking, he had walked into the office, his keen eyes scrutinizing the walls, the floor, and the furniture. He was striding towards a large cupboard when he stopped dead in his tracks, in the middle of a small rug. He stamped. The boards rang hollow. In a flash he had whipped the rug aside, disclosing the trapdoor of Wilkes's secret locker. Biggles suddenly remembered Moses' gold. He saw their danger instantly, and hastened to rectify the oversight, but his very haste was in itself suspicious.
"Oh, yes, I forgot. There is some gold in there."
Delaney's eyes hardened, and he reached for his revolver.
"Oh, yeah? A pile of gold's the sort of thing you easily forget? Huh?"
I was waiting for you to come along to tell you all about it, said Biggles, realizing with dismay how thin the story sounded. The constable knelt down, pulled the trap aside, and lifted out a heavy doeskin bag. As he stared at it, his whole manner became tense. Suddenly, he tossed the bag onto the table, and whipping out his revolver, covered the 3 airmen menacingly.
You dirty skunks, he snarled.
Stand still!
Why, that's the doeskin poke old Mose allus used, cried McBain.
Yes, and his initials are on it, grated Delaney. Now we know who killed Mose, and why.
Just a minute, Delaney. You've got this all wrong, protested Biggles desperately. Don't jump to conclusions. We were going to give it to Mose's daughter.
McBain burst into a roar of laughter.
By thunder, that's a good one!
Angus Sterling gave us that gold yesterday, when we told him Mose was dead, said Biggles quietly.
What's this? Cried Delaney. Are you trying to tell me you saw Angus yesterday? He's on Eskimo Island and froze in.
He may be now, but he wasn't yesterday. As he spoke, Biggles realized, with increasing horror, just what Angus's isolation was likely to mean to them. As a witness, he might as well not exist, for it wouldn't be possible to make contact with him for 6 months. There was even nothing to prove that Angus had given them the transfer with his own hands. Delaney jerked his head towards the door.
Get going, he said. We got a place for your sort. Wait a minute! There's another one of 'em, cried McBain suddenly. Where's the kid?
As if in answer, the Jupiter's engines burst into life. Delaney cursed and dashed outside, but the machine was already on the move. He blazed away with his revolver, McBain and Ferroni joining in with theirs. "You kill that kid, and it'll be the worst day's work you've ever done," shouted Biggles furiously. But to his heartfelt relief, he saw the Jupiter climb into the air, untouched. The constable whirled round.
"March!" he ordered. "Anyone who tries to make a break for it won't know what hits him."
It was a grim journey to Fort Beaver. Algy raged. Wilkes strode along, glowering his annoyance. Biggles was irritated, but endeavoured to preserve a calm front. The fact of the matter was, not one of them realized the real seriousness of their position. Nor did they imagine it possible that they would be tried by any but an official court of law. Approaching Fort Beaver, McBain hurried ahead. Biggles attached no special significance to this at the time, but before very long he realized what the man's purpose had been. Except for this, things might have turned out very differently. The first indication of McBain's errand occurred while the prisoners were still some distance from the town. Several men appeared, hurrying towards them in a manner that was definitely hostile. Muttering and casting malevolent glances at the prisoners, they joined the party. Others soon appeared.
"Keep close to me. I don't like the look of things," muttered Delaney. "If this crowd takes things into their own hands, you won't stand a dog's chance. I don't know what set 'em off like this."
"McBain, probably," replied Biggles. More and more men were hurrying out from the village to meet them, and the noise swelled in volume. Above the medley of sound, odd phrases could be heard.
"String 'em up, the dirty murderers!"
yelled an old man.
"Like we did in the old days!"
"Hand them over, Delaney!" roared another.
"Fetch your rope, somebody!"
"That's it!
Hang 'em!" bellowed McBain. A stone was thrown, striking Delaney on the temple. At the sight of blood, the noise died down for a moment, and the constable seized the opportunity. "What's gone wrong with you?" he shouted furiously. "Would you hang a man without a fair trial?" "Yes," bellowed a miner in reply.
"Give 'em a trial, and the lawyers will help 'em dodge the noose.
Old Mose made his home here in Fort Beaver.
It's up to us to deal with his killers." "Who said they killed Mose?" roared Delaney.
"Brindle McBain says so," screeched a woman. "He seems mighty anxious to get you hanged," muttered Delaney to Biggles. "A sight too anxious." He looked at the clamouring crowd. "If we don't make the jail, they'll lynch you. It's our only chance. Follow me." With Delaney leading, they dashed pell-mell down the rear of some frame buildings and raced towards a heavily built log cabin. A single iron-barred window plainly announced its purpose. The crowd, initially taken by surprise by this sudden move, surged close behind, yelling wildly. Several shots were fired, but they went wide, flecking up the earth or ripping splinters from the wooden buildings. Delaney was feeling in his pocket for the key, even before they reached the jail. As he was fumbling with the lock, McBain fired, and a bullet thudded into the logs. Biggles whirled round and fired 4 quick shots over the head of the crowd, and while it did not stop their progress, it delayed them long enough. They all rushed inside, Delaney slamming the massive door behind them and locking it. "Where did you get that gun?" he asked angrily. "You should have searched me," answered Biggles simply. The constable did not pursue the subject, but ducked as a stone whirled through the window. It struck the opposite wall with a crash and fell to the floor. A piece of paper was tied to it. Delaney picked it up and, in the fast waning light, read the message written on the paper.
"It's from that fellow of yours, Smith," said Delaney. "He's taken my horse and is going to Blackfoot Point for help. There's an officer and 4 troopers there," he added. "Someone in the crowd must have given him the tip."
"How far away is this place?" asked Biggles.
"Oh, a bit over 20 miles. We can't expect help before dawn, and I reckon that'll be too late."
A sudden shout came from outside. "Get a log, somebody! We'll soon have the door down!" "Here they come! With a tree!" shouted Delaney presently, and levelling his revolver, fired 2 shots out of the window. There came a furious yell from outside, and the 2 shots were answered by a dozen. Delaney staggered back, clutching his upper arm.
"They got me through the shoulder," snarled the constable, leaning against the wall.
A moment later the whole building shook as a heavy weight struck the door with a crash. Biggles' jaw set. Revolver in hand, he crept to the window and peeped out. 4 men were just lifting the heavy log, which was being used as a battering ram. Biggles fired, and the nearest man staggered, dropping the log. Again Biggles fired. Another man fell, prompting a general dash for cover. Biggles leapt aside as the fusillade of answering shots came. The acrid smell of cordite filled the room. Several times, as the night wore on, the attack on the jail was resumed, but on each occasion it was narrowly beaten off by the defenders.
"With luck, we'll last one more attack," announced Delaney during a pause.
"How so?" asked Biggles.
"I've only 1 cartridge left."
"And I've none."
"My gun's empty,"
said Biggles quietly, tossing the useless weapon on the floor.
"I wonder what Ginger's up to," he added hopelessly.
Algy looked up. "Gosh, I'd forgotten about Ginger," he confessed.
"What can he do, do you suppose?"
Biggles shrugged his shoulders.
"Goodness knows."
"Can't be far short of dawn," remarked Delaney.
"Sort of quiet out there. What are they planning now?"
"We shall soon know, I fancy," replied Biggles, as the sound of stealthy footsteps came from outside. There was a sudden rush, then silence. An orange light flickered on the window frame, growing rapidly brighter. It was accompanied by a crisp, crackling sound. "They've set the place on fire!" gasped Biggles. "Either we go out and hang, or stay here and fry." While events at the jail had been reaching this grim conclusion, Ginger had embarked on a desperate course of action. A course which had started back at the aerodrome on his return to the office with the long-awaited coffee. He was just in time to hear Delaney accuse Biggles of the murder of old Mose, and quickly he realized the desperate nature of the trap into which the airman had fallen. On the spur of the moment he could think only of his freedom and the dire necessity for immediate action. If he could get into the air, he would be safe. Dropping everything, he dashed for the Jupiter. At 1,000 feet, he turned the aircraft, wondering where to go. Looking down, he could see the little group marching off towards Fort Beaver and the jailhouse. Still circling and climbing steadily for height, Ginger switched his thoughts to the immediate future. What ought he to do for the best? He could see no point in going to Moose Creek. He thought of Angus, but realized that with the freeze-up, no power on earth could get the Jupiter there and back. Suddenly he remembered the isolated log cabin, where the Winkle had landed on its way down from Moose Creek. It was not far away, and there was just a chance that he might find something there. Something that could possibly bear out the story Biggles would tell. The true story. Satisfied he was at least doing the best thing possible, Ginger swung the Jupiter round until its nose pointed northwest, the direction of the cabin. Eventually Ginger picked out his objective. The cabin looked pathetically forlorn, he thought, in its desolate surroundings. He did not bother to taxi up to it. Switching off the engines, he glanced around and jumped out. As there was no sign of life, Ginger started walking briskly towards the cabin. He was still about 20 yards away when a strange noise stopped him short. Suddenly he saw something emerge from the cabin window. A split second later he realized what it was. A rifle barrel. Before he could even move, the rifle cracked. For a brief instant, Ginger swayed on his feet. Then he crashed forward on his face and lay still. The cabin door was thrown open, and the Indian member of McBain's gang emerged, holding a smoking rifle in his hands. He strode towards the motionless figure with a cat-like tread, then stopped and leaned the rifle against a tree stump. Drawing a vicious knife from his belt, he advanced confidently towards his victim. With his lips parted in a savage smile, the Indian bent over Ginger. With a sudden grunt, Ginger sprang to his feet, for he had not been killed by the Indian's shot. He had felt the whistle of the bullet as it passed his cheek, but had dived rather than fallen to the ground, hoping that the man who had fired at him would be deceived and might give the pretended corpse the chance to turn the tables. The Indian had instinctively leapt back at Ginger's unexpected return to life, giving Ginger the chance to pull his gun. However, before he could pull the trigger, the Indian knocked the weapon aside with a lightning sweep of his arm. The automatic described a short flight through the air and came to rest on the turf some 10 yards away. Ginger made a rush for it and reached it at the precise moment the Indian grabbed the rifle. Both weapons came together and 2 loud reports rang out, one following the other so closely that the sounds blended. Both shots missed their targets. Before Ginger could refire, the Indian had whirled around and was now running rapidly for the shelter of a belt of timber. Furthermore, as he ran, the Indian bent low and twisted and turned in a manner that made shooting with a pistol a waste of powder. Still running, the Indian disappeared from sight amongst the fir trees. The surprise of his encounter with McBain's Indian had left Ginger not a little shaken. Moreover, he saw that it was going to be difficult to search the cabin thoroughly and, at the same time, keep a lookout for the redskin. To make matters worse, the light was failing. It would soon be dark. He took a pace forward, then stiffened suddenly, as a dreadful cry was borne to his ears. It was the howl of a wolf, and at the long-drawn cry Ginger's blood ran cold. Again came the ghastly howl, nearer this time, and before it had come to a quivering end, it was taken up by others. Ginger forgot the Indian. He forgot everything. His one instinct was to head for the shelter of the Jupiter. The next instant he was flying for his life in the direction of the machine. A chorus of howls broke out behind him, and a frantic glance over his shoulder told him the worst. A line of black shapes had broken cover and were streaking after him. He ran as he had never run before. And as he ran, Ginger knew that his life depended upon a relatively trivial circumstance. The wolves were so close behind him that if the cabin door of the Jupiter was shut, he would not have time to open it. He couldn't remember whether he had closed the door or left it open. Nor could he see until he was within a dozen paces whether it was open or shut. It was open. With a last convulsive effort, Ginger leapt at the aperture and slammed the door behind him. Just as the leading wolf launched itself through the air, it struck the door with a crash that made the machine rock. Ginger, still half crazed with panic, sank down in the control seat. He was tired. He was cold. He felt weak and hungry. In fact, he was sick of the whole business. Things seemed to be going from bad to worse. With a glance out the window at the wolves, he decided to stay where he was, at least until morning. Searching about, Ginger found a few pieces of broken biscuit, and it was while he was munching these ravenously that he noticed a change in the behaviour of the wolves. One by one they had broken away from the Jupiter, and were now circling the log cabin, howling loudly. Seeing they were all looking upwards, Ginger too raised his eyes. Conspicuous against the snow on the roof was a man, and there was only one man likely to be in such a place at such a time: the Indian. As he watched, Ginger saw the Indian slip twice, and each time climb back to the ridge with an effort. He wondered why the man did not fire at the wolves, but watching his hands he knew the reason.
The Indian had dropped the rifle in his haste to climb onto the roof. He had been attempting to sneak back to the cabin when the wolves caught his scent. Opening the side window, Ginger looked out. "Can you hold on?" he yelled.
"No, too cold. Die with cold here,"
came the rather faint reply. The last thing Ginger wanted now was that the Indian should die and carry the secret of the gold to his grave or to the stomachs of the brutes prowling below. There was only one thing he could do. It took him nearly 10 minutes to get the first kick out of one of the propellers. A minute later the engine started with its customary roar. Ginger didn't bother about the other engine. One would be sufficient for his purpose. In the face of a roaring aero engine, the wolves were soon in full flight. Slowly, alert for any sign of treachery, Ginger taxied the machine right up to the cabin wall and switched off. Covering the Indian with his automatic, he jumped down and picked up the rifle he could now see lying in the snow. "All right," he said curtly. "Come down, but be careful." The Indian slid off the roof, so stiff with cold that he had difficulty in getting to his feet. Ginger took the Indian's knife from his belt and tossed it, with the rifle, into the machine. He kept him covered with the pistol and grimly pointed to the hut. Once inside, Ginger wasted no time. "Now," he said to his prisoner, "I'm going to ask you some questions. Where is the gold?" The Indian did not reply. "You'd better talk, unless you want to go back outside to the wolves," threatened Ginger. "You'll talk anyway, when they try you for murdering Mose," he went on remorselessly. "You killed him, didn't you?"
"Not me. No. Was McBain,"
flashed back the Indian quickly. "How do you know?" demanded Ginger.
"He hit Mose with butt of gun. I saw him clean blood and hair off afterwards."
Ginger was more than pleased about this piece of evidence, but he did not pause in his questioning. So far so good, but now, where's the gold? The Indian turned his face towards the cabin stove.
"Under there,"
he said simply. It did not take Ginger long to drag the stove aside and reveal a large cavity. Nestled inside were 8 small sacks, each tied and sealed. On every bulging sack was printed the words, "Moose Creek Goldfields, Incorporated." There was only one other thing in the cavity, a small iron object. When Ginger saw the brand of the Moose Creek Company on the base of it, he understood. "A spare seal," he murmured. "So that's how McBain was able to do the trick." The Indian said nothing. He looked far from happy and very weak from the exposure he'd experienced on the roof. Ginger looked around the cabin for some means of warming his failing prisoner. The first thing he saw was a fur coat hanging from a peg on the opposite wall. It gave him a turn at first, for he recognized it at once as McBain's. But Ginger lifted it down, intending to hand it to the Indian. As he took it down, something sharp in the sleeve pierced his forearm. He located the offending object in the turned-up fold of the cuff, and taking it out, regarded it for some moments. An extraordinary expression on his face. Slipping the object quickly back into the turn-up, he spread the coat over the shoulders of his prisoner. The Indian hadn't noticed a thing. The night passed as slowly as any Ginger could remember, but at long last the grey dawn for which he had waited shed its feeble light through the window. There had, of course, been no question of sleep, with a dangerous character like the Indian in the room. "Well, come on your feet and we'll get along," ordered Ginger. His thoughts turned briefly to his companions. They must have wondered what's happened to me. Anyway, Fort Beaver, here I come. Had Ginger known what was happening at Fort Beaver, his cheerful confidence would have received a rude shock. Indeed, the others had wondered what had happened to Ginger, but now, as they stood in the smoke-filled jail, he slipped from their minds. Flames licked hungrily around the walls. "That's the end of it, then," announced Algy calmly. "As Biggles says, we either go out or fry." "Of the two, I prefer to go out," said Biggles.
"And me,"
nodded Wilkes. Smoke and flames poured into the room as Delaney threw open the door. A yell went up from outside.
"I'll go first," said the constable, and took a running leap out the door. Biggles followed. Almost before his feet touched the ground, many hands seized him and roughly bound his wrists behind his back. The same fate befell the other airmen, and presently they were assembled in the midst of a jubilant marching throng. "Where are they taking us?" Biggles asked Delaney, who was walking beside him, unmolested by the crowd. "Ain't no sense in telling you lies," answered the constable. "There's a hanging tree on the edge of the aerodrome." "Thanks," replied Biggles, not without bitterness. The eastern sky was comparatively light by the time they reached the tree. The prisoners were led under a large branch, over which 3 ropes, with nooses, were thrown. "Silly sort of a way to die," complained Algy in a dazed voice. "No use trying to get the crowd to listen to us, I suppose?" "Not in the slightest," returned Biggles. "Look at 'em. No, I don't usually give up easily, but I must confess there seems to be no way out of this pickle." His face was grim, as rough hands slipped a large noose around his neck. Turning, he watched the others being treated in the same way, regardless of Delaney's frantic expostulations. "Keep your eyes on McBain, Delaney," called Biggles loudly. "He's the man who murdered Mose, and us." An expectant hush fell over the crowd. It was Biggles who knew first that the machine was coming. His keen ears picked up the drone of the motors. "Here comes Ginger!" he yelled desperately, by which time others in the crowd had heard it too. There was a quick babble of excited conversation. The immediate preparations for the hanging were temporarily abandoned, and several people pointed to the fast-approaching Jupiter.
Never mind about that,
shouted McBain, as if he sensed that the oncoming aeroplane was a danger to the success of his plans. Ferroni demanded that the hanging should proceed, but the attention of the crowd was distracted by the behaviour of the machine. At first it seemed the pilot was going to glide straight to the aerodrome and land, but at the last moment the machine turned suddenly as if the pilot had observed the crowd and wished to see it at close quarters. Straight over the tree, at a height of not more than 50 feet, the Jupiter soared and then went into a tight circle.
"Well, come on! Ain't you never seen an aeroplane before? Let's get on with the hanging!"
roared McBain. But the noise of the Jupiter's engines so drowned the words that only those in his immediate vicinity heard them. "What does he think he's up to?" Delaney asked Biggles. "I don't know," he answered, "but I rather fancy he's going to throw something out." "Yes, he is." The next moment a dark object was hurtling downwards, turning slowly as it fell. There was a yell of alarm from the crowd, each member of which took steps to make sure that it did not hit him. The falling object finally crashed to earth in the middle of the scattered spectators. The actual moment of impact produced a curious effect. So curious, in fact, that it is doubtful if any one of the watchers had the slightest idea of what had happened. There seemed to be a sort of brilliant yellow flash, almost like a tongue of flame, which licked along the short turf for a brief moment before it disappeared. The crowd converged on it, and all was hidden from view. There was an excited whisper, almost a hiss, and then a shout went up. Delaney had run forward with the others. "Stand away there!" he ordered crisply. Curiously enough, the crowd gave way to him, as though it once more respected his authority. Mass hysteria is a strange thing. It can die down as quickly as it can arise, and thus it was in this case. Delaney perceived his opportunity, and was not slow in taking advantage of it.
"Stand clear,"
he snapped.
"Don't touch it, anybody.
And that goes for you too, McBain," he went on curtly. Delaney stooped and picked up something from the ground. It looked like a piece of torn sacking. "Moose Creek Goldfields," he read in an amazed voice. Then, a tone higher, he added, "Boys, it's the Moose Creek Gold!" The words were received with a loud buzz of excitement, and everyone pressed forward to see the pile of yellow dust that had burst from the bag when it hit the ground. Delaney strode to where the prisoners were standing, the nooses still around their necks.
The crowd, its anger melting in the face of this new mystery, surged after him.
"What do you know about this?" Delaney asked Biggles sternly.
"Not much more than you do," replied Biggles. "I suggest you let the boy tell his story in his own way. Here he comes now." Ginger, who by this time had landed, was in fact marching towards the crowd. In front of him, covered by his automatic, walked the Indian, draped in the long fur coat from the cabin. The crowd fell silent as it watched the approach of this curious procession. On all faces was astonishment not far from incredulity. Straight through the crowd to where Delaney was standing, Ginger marched his prisoner, the spectators forming a lane to allow them to pass. Ginger's eyes opened wide when he saw the dangling ropes.
"What's the idea?"
asked Delaney, the words sounding strangely loud in the hush that had fallen. "I've brought back evidence to prove that my friends are innocent," cried Ginger. "I've brought back the gold," he went on. "Some of it you may have seen. The rest is in the aeroplane."
"Where did you find it?"
demanded Delaney. "I found it under the floor of an isolated cabin, where the thief had hidden it until such time as it suited him to collect it. This Indian was left on guard over it, and he will tell you to whom the cabin belongs. It belongs to Brindle McBain." McBain, white with passion, pushed his way to the front. "What are you saying?" he snarled. "I'm saying that you stole the gold," answered Ginger in a hard voice. "Instead of flying it straight down here, you landed at your cabin, broke the seals of the boxes, took out the gold, substituted lead, and then resealed the boxes, and here's the seal with which you did the job." Ginger handed Delaney the duplicate seal. "That's a lie!" roared McBain. "We shall see," retorted Ginger imperturbably. He raised his voice. "Does anyone here recognize the coat this Indian is wearing?" he demanded. A dozen voices answered, "It's McBain's." "Now," continued Ginger to McBain, "on the night that old Mose was murdered, I believe I'm right in saying that you were wearing that coat." McBain hesitated. It was as if he suspected a trap, but could think of no way of avoiding it. He could not deny that he had worn the coat, for nearly every man present had been in the saloon that night and must have seen him in it. "Well, what if I was wearing it?" he snarled belligerently. "Has anyone else but you ever worn that coat?" Again a moment's hesitation. The atmosphere was electric. "It's my coat. Nobody else has had it. That's what you're getting at?" grated McBain. Ginger pointed to the turn-up at the bottom of the fur sleeve. "Just feel in there and take out what you find," he said quietly. "And then perhaps you'll tell us how it got there." Like a man in a dream, almost against his will it seemed, McBain's finger went down into the turn-up. The silence was such that every member of the crowd might have been holding his breath. A look of relief passed over McBain's face as he found what was evidently an insignificant object. With a short laugh he took it out and looked at it. As he did so, his face blanched. Yet the object was simple enough. It was merely an opal-headed tie-pin. "Does anyone recognize that pin?" called Ginger loudly. Nearly everyone present recognized it, and knew to whom it belonged. The murdered prospector. Delaney raised his hand for silence. Then he took a revolver from the hand of a man standing near him. The man did not protest. "McBain," said Delaney, "I reckon I know why you were so anxious to lynch 3 innocent men." The crowd surged forward, muttering ominously, nor did it heed Delaney's orders to stand still. Possibly the fact that most of the men felt that they had been duped by McBain had something to do with it. Be that as it may, McBain evidently suspected what his fate might be. It rather seemed as if he lost his nerve. Accompanied by Ferroni, with a wild rush he swept those who stood around him from his path and drove a lane through the outskirts of the spectators, heading for safety. "Stop!" roared Delaney above the uproar, but the fugitives took no notice. "Look out! They're making for the machine!" shouted Biggles. "And the gold's in it! If you don't stop them, they'll get away and take the gold with them." McBain and Ferroni were in fact running like hares towards the Jupiter, which was still standing out in the middle of the aerodrome where Ginger had left it, and it seemed likely they would have succeeded in their object but for an unexpected development. From the far side of the aerodrome, riding at a gallop, came 5 uniformed figures. Delaney yelled a warning. He had now reached the outskirts of the crowd, a position from which he could use his revolver without risk of hitting the wrong man. But although he emptied it at the fast-retreating figures, the range was too long and the shots did not touch their mark. But they served another purpose just as useful. They gave the oncoming horsemen at least an inkling of what was happening, as was revealed by the manner in which they swerved to cut them off. McBain and his pilot swerved too, but they could not hope to compete with horses. Seeing that they were trapped, they both drew their revolvers and tried to shoot their way to the machine. They did succeed in emptying one saddle, but then a fusillade of shots rang out, and McBain pitched face downwards on the turf. Ferroni, evidently seeing that his case was hopeless, threw down his weapon and raised his hands above his head.
"Here, Delaney, haven't we been trussed up like this long enough?" asked Biggles reproachfully.
The constable took out his jackknife and cut the prisoners free.
"That kid of yours was just about in time," he said gravely.
"He usually is," grinned Biggles.
"Who are these newcomers?"
"Captain Lanson and the troopers from Blackfoot Point," answered Delaney. "That mechanic of yours must have got through to him. Phew, what a report I shall have to make. You better not go away. The captain will want to see you too."
"I suppose you're no longer in any doubt as to who killed old Mose?" Biggles asked Delaney as they walked across the aerodrome towards the Jupiter, near which the crowd had reassembled.
"None whatever," replied Delaney.
"Then in that case I assume we are no longer under arrest."
"No, you're free as far as I'm concerned."
"Then if it's all the same to you, we'll get our machine inside its hangar and tidy things up a bit. I suppose I ought to fly up to Moose Creek and tell them the gold is safe."
"Well, best wait until you've seen the captain," advised Delaney. They stood still as a little procession passed them, carrying a body. They learned that it was McBain, and that he was dead. A bullet had gone through his heart, killing him instantly. Ferroni, with handcuffs on his wrists, was standing near the troopers, towards whom Delaney now continued his way.
"You'll find us in Arctic Airways shed if you want us," Biggles told him as their paths separated, the airmen making for the Jupiter with the object of putting it in the shed. This they did, after which, over a hastily prepared meal, Ginger gave an account of his adventures at the cabin. When he had finished, the others, for his benefit, described what had happened in Fort Beaver. They were concluding the meal with coffee when Delaney and his superior officer entered. At the officer's request, Biggles narrated the entire story of their adventures, from the time they had received Wilkes's letter in London. The tale took a long time to tell, but both the officer and the constable listened breathlessly, particularly when Biggles related the events that had occurred near Angus Sterling's cabin.
"And what are you fellows going to do now?" the officer asked, when at last the story was told.
"Well, as far as I can see, our work is finished," answered Biggles.
"The transfer which we got from Angus Sterling settles any doubt as to who owns the aerodrome, and now that there's only one line operating between Fort Beaver and Moose Creek, the Goldfields people will be glad enough to use it. Anyway, they should be grateful for the recovery of that last consignment of metal, because, but for the Arctic Airways, they would have lost it. I reckon that Canwell, when he hears what's happened, ought to give Arctic Airways a contract for handling all their freight."
"Yeah, I think so too," agreed the officer. "I know the chairman of the company. I'll have a word with him about it at the first opportunity."
Which in fact he did a day or two later, with the result that the contract was soon forthcoming, as well as an offer of extra finance for spare equipment, should it be required. And that is really the end of the story. Wilkes implored the others to remain on at Fort Beaver and share the profits of his enterprise, which had been so nearly wrecked. But Biggles was adamant in his refusal to tie himself to any one spot. However, they stayed on until Arctic Airways was reorganized on proper lines, which did not take very long, for Wilkes found no difficulty in getting staff now McBain and his gang had been removed. Wilkes flew the party back to Quebec in one of the 2 Jupiters the firm now possessed, and it was there that goodbyes were said. "Let me know how things go on," shouted Biggles from the deck of the ship that was to take them back to England.
"I will," promised Wilkes. "Thanks for coming over."
"Don't mention it," grinned Biggles.
"It's been a pleasure."